That slab stays right where my crew poured it, Mr. Hale, and if you touch 1 inch of it, you'll be hearing from our attorney by Friday." Those were the first words Diane Pruitt ever said to me that I bothered to write down, standing at the foot of my own driveway in a coral blazer and white tennis shoes, while a ribbon of fresh gray concrete cured across the only way in or out of my property. She was the president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, 4 years into a term nobody could remember voting for, and she had just paid 2 men to seal off the mouth of a driveway my family had used for 51 years. The property is 11 acres on the high shoulder of a ridge in western Montana, a log house my father framed by hand, a machine shed, and a gravel lane that drops down to the county road. My name is Walt Hale. I am 62 years old, and for 34 of those years, I was a licensed land surveyor for the county before I retired to keep bees and fix old tractors. What Diane did not know, standing there so sure of herself, was that I had walked and recorded every boundary on that ridge with my own instrument, that the easement feeding her entire cul-de-sac of 9 houses ran across the corner of my land, and that the paper granting it had one condition written into it that she had never once read. So let me ask you something, the way I'd ask a neighbor leaning on the same fence. If somebody paved over the only road to your front door and dared you to move it, what would you have done? I want to tell this slow, because the slow part is where it was won. I bought nothing and inherited nothing dishonest. My grandfather cleared the first 2 acres of that ridge in 1941 with a borrowed team and a stump puller, and my father added to it through the 60s, buying out a neighbor's hay ground a few acres at a time, and my wife Ellen and I raised our daughter Casey in the log house through every kind of winter that country throws at you. That house has walls of squared larch my father cut and skidded himself, and you can still see the marks of his broad axe on the beam over the kitchen. Ellen passed 4 years ago, a stroke in the spring, quick and unfair. She went down in the garden between the snap peas and the rhubarb, and by the time the helicopter came over the ridge, she was already gone. Casey was 16 then. She is the reason I kept my temper through all of this, and she is the reason I kept every scrap of paper. Ellen used to say a careful man keeps his receipts and a wise man keeps his maps. I kept both. I had a gray steel cabinet in the machine shed, the kind they sold for shop tools. And in the top drawer I kept a folder for the property that went back to deeds my grandfather signed with a fountain pen, the ink gone brown, but the words still plain. There were the original patent papers, the tax receipts going back to my father's time, the surveys I had run on our own ground over the years, and a county plat map I had laminated and pinned to the inside of the shed door so I could put a finger on any pin on the place without leaving the building. People in town thought of me as the quiet beekeeper on the hill who used to do survey work. What they did not always remember was that 34 years with a transit and a level teaches a man one thing above all others. The ground is exactly where the record says it is, no more and no less, and a corner held by a recorded monument does not move because somebody wishes it would. Cedar Hollow was not there when my grandfather cleared the ridge. It went up in stages. The first houses in the early 2000s on a bench of land below mine that had been hay ground. The developer who platted it needed a way to get water and a road up to those lots, and the cleanest line ran across the southwest corner of my father's land. So in 1998, my father granted them an easement. 60 feet wide, recorded at the county, signed and notarized. I was the one who surveyed it. I set the pins myself, a young man then with my father standing at the corner watching, proud to do a job on my own father's ground while he looked on. And because my father was nobody's fool, he made me sit at the kitchen table the night before he signed. And he had me write one sentence into the grant in my own hand before he would put his name to it. He told me that a road is a thing that wants to grow, that you give a man 60 feet, and in 20 years he wants 80, and pavement and a gate with his name on it, and that the time to stop that is before the ink is dry. So we wrote it. The easement was for ingress and egress and utilities only. It could not be widened, paved, gated, or improved in any way that changed the surface or the use. That servient estate was us. My father read it twice, nodded once, and signed. That sentence sat in the county records for 26 years before anyone needed it, and my father was 10 years in the ground before it ever earned its keep. I met Diane Pruitt for the first time the summer after Ellen died. I was out by the hives in a veil and gloves when I heard the tires on the gravel, and I came around the shed to see a white sport utility idling at the top of my lane. Spotless, the kind of vehicle that has never had a bag of feed or a roll of fence in the back of it. The plate read a clever little arrangement of letters that I will not repeat, the vanity kind. And there was a clipboard riding on the passenger seat the way a dog rides for some people. She got out in a coral blazer and white tennis shoes, picking her way across my gravel like the rocks had personally offended her, and she introduced herself as the president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, and her words, the eyes and ears of the community. She looked past me at the machine shed. "That outbuilding," she said, "is visible from the road. Visible outbuildings are against our community standards. We will need a remediation plan." I took off my gloves slow. I told her my shed had stood there since before her subdivision was a survey stake, and that the road she meant was a county road my father helped grade. She gave me the smile people give when they have already filed you under problem, the patient little smile that does not reach the eyes, and she said she was sure we could find a path to compliance, and she got back in the white truck and back down my lane. I went into the shed, and I opened the folder, and I wrote the date at the top of a clean page. July 19th. First contact. One line. The way you log a survey shot. I did not know yet that her husband, Greg Pruitt, ran the company that was buying up the last open parcels on the bench below me, and that a wider, paved, county-dedicated road across my corner would turn his cheap landlocked acreage into prime frontage worth several times what he paid. I learned that later. The slow way, the way you learn most true things. At first, I only knew she had a clipboard and a grievance, and that she had said a strange word in my own dooryard. Community. As if a thing my family built across 3 generations was a feature of her subdivision that had been left off the brochure. The first letter came in August. It was on association letterhead, and it informed me that my property, while not formally inside the Cedar Hollow plat, was in the board's determination, functionally part of the community, and therefore subject to its architectural standards. That was the phrase she would use again and again over the next 3 years. Functionally part of the community. I read it twice and filed it. I am a surveyor. Functionally is not a word that survives contact with a recorded plat. My land was outside her boundary by 90 feet at the closest point, and I had the map to prove it. I did not write back an angry letter. I wrote back one sentence stating that my parcel was not within the association, and asked her to direct any further correspondence to that fact. Then I made a copy of my own letter and put it in the folder behind hers. That was the first step on a staircase I would climb for 3 years, and I counted every step. Step 1. The letter about the shed. Step 2 came in October. A notice of violation for my driveway gate, which she claimed did not meet community color standards. My gate is a pipe gate. I welded myself out of 2-inch black pipe, hung on a railroad-tie post, my father said in concrete, and it stood on my land a good 90 feet inside my own line. And it had no color standard to violate because it belonged to no association on this earth. I read the notice at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, and Casey read it over my shoulder and asked if these people were allowed to do this. I told her they were allowed to mail anything they like. Being allowed to mail it and being right are two different counties. I filed it. Step 3, December. A letter demanding I submit my beekeeping operation for review as an agricultural nuisance. 40 hives that had pollinated half the orchards in that valley for 2 decades, and she had decided they were a nuisance because the word sounded like authority. Step 4. The following March, a fine. An actual invoice printed on the same coral letterhead, $200, for what she called continued non-compliance. I held that one a long time. $200 for not obeying a body that had no more jurisdiction over me than the weather. I never paid it. I wrote the date on it, and I filed it. By the end of that first winter, I had 4 pieces of paper in the folder, and Diane Pruitt had 4 pieces of paper that said, in the language of any court, that she believed she had authority over land she did not own. I understood even then that her letters were not really to me. They were to a future room building a record. The trouble for her was that I was building one too, and mine had a recorded plat at the bottom of it. Casey was the one who started photographing things. She was 17 by then, sharp as her mother, and she had figured out, before I had that, the paper trail was a kind of weapon if you stacked it neatly enough. She set up a small camera on the corner of the shed that looked down the lane toward the county road, and she set it to save to 2 drives, the one in the camera and a spare in the house. I thought it was a teenager being a teenager. It turned out to be the most important thing either of us did. The spring of the second year is when Diane stopped writing letters and started sending people. A man in a polo shirt and a lanyard showed up one morning while I was rotating frames, parked his sedan at the top of the lane, and walked down toward the shed with a clipboard and a tape measure and a badge clipped to his belt. I came out wiping my hands on a rag. He told me he was conducting a compliance inspection on behalf of the association. I looked at the badge. Even from 10 feet away, I could see it was the kind you order off the internet for $30, a shield shape with no county seal and no number, the lettering already peeling at one corner. I asked him a simple question. I asked him to name the statute or the ordinance that gave a private homeowners association the right to inspect a private parcel that lay outside its recorded plat. He started to say something about community standards and stopped. I asked him again plainly, "Name the statute." He could not. I told him he was welcome to stand on the county road and look at my shed all day if it pleased him, but if he stepped 1 foot past the pins I had flagged along my line, I would be on the phone to the sheriff before he reached the gravel. He looked down the lane at the little camera on the corner of the shed, the red light steady on it, and he did the math on his $30 badge and his tape measure. And he turned around and walked back to his sedan. The lanyard, the fake badge, the tape measure he never got to use, the sedan backing out. Saved to 2 drives before he reached the county road. Step 5. Step 6 was the worst of the early ones because it reached past me and touched the people I did business with. I sell honey to 2 stores in town and to a man named Earl who runs a roadside stand out on the highway, jars on a plank table under a tin awning, an honor box for when he steps away. That summer, Earl called me one evening. "Ah, woman," he said, coral jacket, clipboard. Came by the stand. Told him my honey was produced in violation of county code and that he could be held liable if he kept selling it for me. He told me he had laughed and asked her which code, and she had not been able to say, and she had driven off in a white truck. Not everyone would have laughed her off, though, and I knew it. There are folks who hear the word liable and just clear the shelf. I drove out to Earl's stand that evening. The light was going long and gold across the highway, and Earl was wiping down the plank table, and he told me the whole thing, again from the top, the coral blazer, the clipboard, the word he kept coming back to, functionally. She had told him my place was functionally part of the community, and therefore the community could regulate what came off it. I sat down at his picnic table, and I wrote it all down while he talked, the date, the words, the description of the truck, and when I finished, I turned it around, and I asked him would he sign it. He read it once and signed it with the stub of a pencil from his apron, right there under the tin awning. The first affidavit. I drove home in the dark with it on the seat beside me like something fragile, and in the morning, I put it in the folder. Step 6. I want to be honest about something here. There were nights that second summer when I sat in the machine shed with the folder open and my hands were not steady. Anger is a physical thing. It sits behind your breastbone and it wants out. What held it down was simple. I had buried my wife, and I had a daughter watching how I handled trouble, and I had 34 years of training that told me the same thing every time. The ground does not lie. You do not win a boundary fight by shouting across it. You win it with the instrument and the paper, and you win it once, cleanly, in front of someone who has the authority to make it stick. So I filed, and I waited, and I kept my pins flagged. It was that autumn I finally understood the why of it. I was at the county building to pull a copy of a culvert permit, and I happened to see a notice posted for a planning commission hearing. Cedar Hollow Development, the applicant. The proposal was to extend and dedicate a public road to serve a new phase of 19 lots on the bench below me. I read the legal description twice. The road they wanted dedicated ran straight up the line of my father's easement, 60 feet wide, and the plan called for it to be widened to 80 and paved. The applicant of record was Greg Pruitt, Diane's husband. There it was. Every letter, every fake inspector, every fine, every visit to Earl, all of it had one purpose. They needed my corner, not functionally, legally. And the only thing standing between Greg Pruitt and a road that would make him rich was one sentence my father had made me write in 1998. I did not run to the hearing and waive my deed. That is not how you do it. A document produced in anger in the wrong room is just a man shouting with paper in his hand. I went home and I pulled the original easement grant and I read the condition again. The one about no widening, no paving, no gating, no change of surface or use without written consent of the servient owner. Then I pulled my own survey of the easement from 1998 with my license number on it and the county recording stamp. Then I started a new section in the folder, and on the front of it, I wrote one word. That winter, Diane escalated in a way that told me she knew the hearing was coming and that she was trying to manufacture a record that made me look like the unreasonable one. The fines started arriving monthly. $200 in November, $200 in December, $200 in January. I filed each one. I never paid one. She sent a certified letter demanding I grant the association an expanded right-of-way for what she called community road improvements, and she gave me 30 days to comply. I let the 30 days pass. I wrote one sentence in reply, stating that the easement of record governed and that no expansion would be granted, and I sent it certified so there would be a green card to file. The tally that winter reached 11 separate written demands, 3 fake inspections, 2 harassed business contacts, and $1,400 in fines I had never paid and never would. The deputy came in February. His name was Tom Reyes, and I had known him a little for years, the way you know people in a small county, from the feed store and the one diner and the volunteer fire calls. He came up the lane in the county truck looking unhappy, because a deputy coming up a man's lane to act on a complaint he does not believe is an unhappy errand, and he knew I would know it. He stood by the truck and took his hat off. "Walt," he said, "Association filed a complaint. Says you are running an illegal commercial operation up here and refusing lawful inspection. I have to look at it. Doesn't matter what I think. A complaint gets filed, it gets looked at." I told him I understood, and that I had been waiting for somebody official to finally come up so I could show them something. I asked him to come into the shed. I opened the cabinet, and I laid it out for him on the workbench under the laminated plat. The recorded plat, with my land, plainly 90 feet outside the Cedar Hollow boundary, the easement grant from 1998, my own survey with my license number, the county recording stamp. Then I pulled up Casey's footage on the laptop and showed him the man with the $30 badge. Then the stack of fines, 200 at a time, none of them paid. He went quiet the way an honest man goes quiet when he realizes which side of a thing he has been standing on. He told me something I have not forgotten. "Build the pattern," he said. "Keep filing. Every letter, every visit, date it and keep it. When you have got enough of it documented, you do not bring it to me. You bring it to the people who can actually act on it, and you do it in a room where she has to stand up and answer for it." He told me the Planning Commission hearing on that road dedication was where this whole thing would live or die. Then he went back to his truck and wrote in his own report that he had inspected the premises and found no violation of county code, and he tore off a copy and handed it to me through the window. I filed that too behind the fines, in the section I had started to think of as the answer. The thing about a person like Diane Pruitt is that she had been deferred to for so long, she had stopped believing anyone could tell her no and make it stick. Every refusal I gave her, she read as stubbornness, not as a wall. And so she did the thing that finally took the whole matter out of her hands. She decided that if I would not grant the road, she would simply take the access by making it impossible for me to use my own. It was a Tuesday in early April, and I was 40 minutes away in town, picking up frames for the hives. Casey was home, out of school for the day. My phone rang on the bench seat, and it was her. And her voice was not the voice of a calm 17-year-old who had grown up steady on a ridge. "Dad, there's men. 2 of them. A truck. They're pouring something across the bottom of the lane." "I don't. What do I do?" "Slow down," I told her. "Where are you?" "In the house." They came up and they've got, it looks like a cement truck, and the chute, and they're pouring it right across, Dad, across the hole. The only way out. "Stay in the house," I said. "Lock the door, turn the camera on them, and leave it running. Do not go down there. Do you hear me? Do not go down to them. I am coming. 40 minutes. Stay inside." I drove that county road faster than a careful man should, and the whole way her words kept hitting me on a loop. The chute. The only way out. The only way out. I have driven that road 10,000 times, and I never saw it the way I saw it that afternoon. Every curve, a thing standing between me and my daughter. I made myself breathe. I made myself remember that anger in a driveway is just noise, that the only thing that would ever end this was on a recorded page in a steel cabinet, and that the worst thing I could do for Casey was arrive shouting. When I got there, the mouth of my lane was a slab of wet concrete 16 feet wide, curb to curb, gray and shining, and already starting to dull at the edges as it set. A contractor's truck sat on the county road with the chute swung back. 2 laborers stood off to the side, not meeting my eyes. And Diane Pruitt stood beside the fresh slab in a coral blazer with her clipboard against her chest. And that is when she said the words I wrote down first in this telling. "That slab stays right where my crew poured it, Mr. Hale. And if you touch 1 inch of it, you'll be hearing from our attorney by Friday." She said it the way she said everything, like a woman reading a citation to a man she expected to fold. She had decided that my father's easement gave the association the right to control the road, and that controlling the road meant she could pave my access shut and force me to come down the hill and beg for a way out on her terms. She had it exactly backwards, and she had it backwards in front of my daughter, on my land, with 2 witnesses and a camera running on the corner of the shed. I did not touch the slab. I want you to hear that clearly. I did not put a boot in it. I did not shout. I did not lay a hand on anyone. I did not so much as raise my voice across the wet concrete at her. I looked up the hill once and saw Casey at the window, where I had told her to stay, and I gave her a small nod so she would know it was going to be all right. Then I stood at the edge of my own property, and I took out my phone, and I called the sheriff's office, and I asked for Deputy Reyes by name. Then I called the county surveyor's office, an old colleague named Frank, and I asked him to pull the recorded easement and the recorded plat and to bring certified copies to the Planning Commission hearing, which by then was 8 days out. Diane watched me make those calls, and the little smile came back because she thought a man on the phone was a man asking for help. And she had spent her whole life mistaking calm for weakness. She did not understand that I was not asking anyone for a favor. I was filing. Here is the part that mattered and that she never saw coming, and it is the reason I have told you all of this in the order I have. The road they had just poured concrete to claim, the easement they were treating as their own highway, had a condition on it. No widening, no paving, no change of surface without the written consent of the servient owner. They had just paved it. 16 feet of fresh concrete, poured by a crew Greg Pruitt hired, on an easement, whose own terms forbade exactly that without my signature, which they did not have and would never get. They had not blocked my driveway. They had violated the easement so completely that they had broken it. An easement abused in direct violation of its recorded terms can be terminated, and the access that the entire Cedar Hollow cul-de-sac depended on, the water line and the only road for 9 existing houses, and the 19 Greg Pruitt wanted to build, all of it ran through that same corridor, under that same grant, governed by that same sentence. So I let the concrete cure. I did not move it, I documented it. Casey had the whole pour on 2 drives, the truck, the laborers, Diane directing them, the timestamp. Deputy Reyes came that afternoon and stood at the slab with his hat in his hand and told Diane that pouring a permanent structure across a private access without a permit was something he would have to report, and he asked her for the grading permit, and she did not have one. Step 7, and Step 7 had crossed the line from petty into illegal, and they had done it themselves, on camera, in front of a deputy. The 8 days to the hearing were the quietest and longest of the whole 3 years. I did not gloat to Casey, and I did not call Diane, and I did not call a lawyer to threaten anybody. I organized the folder. I sat in the shed under the laminated plat each evening, and I numbered every document in the order it would need to be read. The way you order survey notes so the man behind you can follow your work without you in the room. I made 3 clean copies of the easement grant, the plat, my survey, the fine notices, the affidavits from Earl and now 2 other business contacts, the deputy's clean report, and the single still frame from Casey's camera showing the concrete truck and Diane beside it. I drove down to the bottom of my lane each morning with my coffee, and I looked at the gray slab sitting there across my access. And I will tell you the truth. By the 3rd morning, it did not make me angry anymore. It made me steady. They had handed me the one thing in 3 years I could not have manufactured for myself. They had broken the easement with their own hands, on their own dime, in front of a camera, and all I had to do now was carry the paper into the right room and let somebody with authority read it out loud. The hearing was in the county commission chambers, a plain room with folding chairs and a long table where the planning commission sat. Greg Pruitt was there in a sport coat with his engineer and a lawyer, presenting the road dedication as a community improvement. Diane sat in the front row in coral. There were maybe 40 people in the room, neighbors from Cedar Hollow, some of whom had been told for 3 years that I was the difficult man on the hill. When the floor opened for public comment on the road dedication, I walked to the small podium with the folder. I did not give a speech. I have heard men give speeches in rooms like that and lose anyway. I laid 3 things on the table in front of the commission. The recorded easement grant from 1998, my recorded survey of that easement with my license number, and the still frame from my daughter's camera. I said only this: the road you are being asked to dedicate runs entirely on a private easement across my land. That easement, recorded in 1998, prohibits widening, paving, or any change of surface without the written consent of the owner of the servient estate, which is me. I have granted no such consent. 8 days ago, the applicant's crew poured 16 feet of concrete across that easement, direct violation of its recorded terms, without a grading permit, blocking the only access to my home where my daughter was alone. I have the recording, the recorded grant, and the recorded survey here for the commission. The chair of the Planning Commission was a woman named Ruth Vance, who had sat on county boards for 2 decades and knew a recorded instrument when she saw one. She put on her reading glasses and she picked up the easement grant, and she read the condition aloud to the whole room in a flat county voice, the sentence about no widening, no paving, no change of surface or use without the written consent of the owner of the servient estate. She set it down. She asked Greg Pruitt's engineer, plainly, whether the easement on the table was the access for the proposed road. The engineer looked at his shoes and said it was, that there was no other way to serve the lots. She asked whether the applicant had obtained the written consent of the servient owner. There was a long silence in that room, the kind of silence that has weight to it, where 40 people stop shifting and folding chairs all at once. Greg Pruitt looked at his lawyer, and the lawyer looked at the table and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Ruth Vance turned to my old colleague Frank and asked him to confirm that the survey and the grant in front of her were the documents of record at the county. He stood and confirmed them by their recording numbers. Then she picked up the single still frame from Casey's camera, the concrete truck and the gray slab and the coral blazer beside it, and she looked at it for a moment, and she did not need anyone to explain to her what she was looking at. She did not bang a gavel or make a show of it. She said the application for road dedication could not proceed on an easement whose terms had been violated and whose servient owner had refused consent, and that the matter of the unpermitted concrete and the access blockage would be referred to county code enforcement and the county attorney. That was the motion. It carried. In one motion, in a plain room, the road that was supposed to make Greg Pruitt rich was dead, and the easement his wife had spent 3 years trying to expand was now formally in question because they had broken its own terms. I will give you the paired numbers because they are the whole story. In 3 years, Diane Pruitt had sent me 11 written demands, ordered 3 fake inspections, harassed 5 of my business contacts, and levied $1,400 in fines, of which I had paid exactly 0. And on the other side of the ledger, the easement my father had me record in 1998 contained exactly 1 sentence of condition, written 26 years before that hearing. And that 1 sentence, against all of it, was enough. $0 paid, 1 sentence. 26 years on the record. That was the gap, and everyone in that room could feel it. The consequence fell exactly where their own actions aimed it. The unpermitted pour triggered a county code enforcement action against Cedar Hollow Development, and Greg Pruitt was ordered to remove the concrete at his own expense and to restore the easement to its recorded condition. The road dedication never came back. The 19 new lots could not be served without that access, and without the road they were landlocked, the same cheap acreage he had started with. Within the year, the development company that had banked everything on that frontage was selling parcels at a loss. The county attorney reviewed the pattern of the association acting as a governing body over land outside its plat, and the board that had rubber-stamped Diane for 4 years finally did not renew her as president. She lost the one thing she had built her whole performance on, the authority. And she lost it because she had reached for a road that was never hers to take. A neighbor from Cedar Hollow, a man named Phil, who had believed for 3 years that I was the problem on the hill, came up my lane that summer with a 6-pack and an apology. He told me the board had circulated my name as a holdout who was blocking community improvements, and that almost no one down there had ever seen the easement or knew there was a condition on it. He had a daughter Casey's age. We sat on the porch and I showed him the folder, not to gloat, just so one more person in that valley would know that the paper had been there the whole time, plain and recorded, for anyone who bothered to read it. The concrete came out in August. A crew Greg Pruitt paid for broke up his own slab and hauled it away and put my gravel lane back the way my grandfather had graded it. Casey was home from her first year of college that week. She walked down to the bottom of the lane with me, and we stood where the slab had been, and the gravel was raw and pale, where the new rock had gone in. And she said, "It looks like nothing ever happened." I told her something had happened. It just did not leave a mark because we did not let it. She is the reason I kept my temper, and she is the reason I kept the paper, and she was standing safe and grown on the ground her great-grandfather cleared. That was the whole of what I wanted. Not the development dead, not Diane out of her chair, just my daughter, safe, on our land, with the lane open. So here is the lesson, plain, the way I would hand it to you across a fence. If you own your ground, walk your boundaries, and know where your pins are. Pull your deed and read it, all of it, including the conditions on any easement that crosses your land, because the sentence that saves you is usually one somebody wrote decades ago and nobody since has bothered to read. When trouble starts, do not answer it with your temper. Answer it with a folder. Write down the date, keep the letters, photograph what you see, get the affidavit signed at the picnic table while the memory is fresh, and save it to 2 drives. File a complaint in writing so there is a green card. And when the day comes to settle it, do not settle it in the driveway. Settle it in the room where there is a recorded instrument on the table and a neutral authority to read it aloud, because a deed laid down quietly in the right room will end an argument that no amount of shouting ever could. The clipboard is loud. The record is patient. The record wins. If you have got a story like this, a fence line, an easement, a board that forgot whose name is on the deed, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are in the middle of their own fight right now and could use to hear how yours came out. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there is always another ridge and another clipboard. And next time I will tell you about the woman 2 valleys over who was told her family's water rights had expired by a man who very much wanted her spring for himself, and what happened when she pulled a filing from 1906 out of a coffee can in her late husband's workshop. Take care of your ground. I will see you next time.